Let's get into this discussion now, and we take you back to one of our leading stories. The South African government has referred Israel to the International Criminal Court to be investigated for war crimes for its continued indiscriminate bombardment of Gaza. President Cyril Ramaphosa has decried the attacks on Palestinian civilians, especially at hospitals. In a recent attack, Israel's ground forces storming Gaza's biggest hospital, that's Al-Shifa, claiming that Hamas is using the hospital for its command. To date, there are more than 11,000 Palestinians that have been killed, with almost half of the victims being children. For some analysis now and to understand better what the action by South Africa means exactly, we speak now to Professor Hennie Strydom, who joins us via the virtual platform. Professor, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. I just want to reflect briefly what President Ramaphosa said whilst on a state visit to Qatar, and I quote him now: "They are now targeting hospitals where babies, women and the injured are dying like flies." Just that caption, Professor, does that make the general public who are listening clear as to why South Africa is taking this tough stance against Israel?
Yeah, certainly. I think South Africa is not the only country who has taken the step. And as a member of the Rome Statute, which is the founding document of the ICC, South Africa is entitled to refer a matter to the prosecutor. And South Africa, in doing so, may also provide evidence, which is, it has been apprised of, to the prosecutor for the assessment by the prosecutor. But I also have to mention the prosecutor is already for some time now busy with investigations, not only in the Gaza incident, but also in Ukraine. So I'm quite sure that the prosecutor is gathering information from various sources, including from governments.
Professor, the President of South Africa also saying the following, and I quote once again: "We have put in a referral because we believe that war crimes are being committed there. And of course, we do not condone the actions which have been taken by Hamas." And that immediately takes us to the October 7 events, which sparked this latest conflict in the Middle East. How difficult is it going to be for the ICC to wade through what they are being asked to do, and that is to investigate war crimes on the part of Israel? But what about Hamas, that also is alleged by Israel to have committed just as egregious crimes against Israelis?
I think we should assume that in investigating this situation that is currently unfolding since the 7th of October, that the prosecutor will certainly also look at the conduct of Hamas and what has taken place inside Israel. That is part of the sort of general investigation that the prosecutor is undertaking. But it's a difficult matter while hostilities are still ongoing. To gather evidence in such circumstances is always a very daunting task. But I think there are sort of, at this point in time, various other sources of information, not necessarily on the ground, that the prosecutor is gathering in order to get a better assessment of the situation and to determine which crimes have been committed and who could be responsible. I have to, also explain that what is happening in this process, once a referral has taken place or the prosecutor has received information, is the prosecutor will make an assessment. And if there is a reasonable indication that crimes have been committed and that certain persons could be held responsible, prosecutor will then take it to one of the chambers of the court. And the court will then also make an assessment of the evidence and then decide whether to authorize the proper investigation of the matter. So this process must still run its course, and it may take time.
Yeah.
But this is a sort of safeguard to prevent sort of flimsy or politically sort of motivated prosecutions, and to make certain that there is a reasonable chance of a successful prosecution.
And interestingly, Professor, you talk about evidence. What kind of evidence will the ICC prosecutor need to look for to back up the allegations of what is being described as genocide and war crimes?
Well, there's a wide range of evidence that can be used. Circumstantial evidence can be used, and then direct evidence, evidence indicating the sort of scope of the destruction, the lives lost of civilians, the nature of the infrastructure that was bombarded and destroyed. And then that will be assessed in the context of the military objective. If it is totally excessive to the military objective, then certainly we have a violation of international humanitarian law. And the evidence on that can come from the sort of direct investigation at the places by sort of investigators, sources that are provided or evidence that is provided by governments, statements that have been made by politicians on both sides, etc. So all of that will provide the context within which an assessment has to be made. And it is for the prosecutor to decide what evidence will be admissible and what evidence will not be admissible. And that is the normal process that is being followed in all prosecutions of any kind.
Sure. Once that evidence is collected, Professor, and of course, an assessment will have to be made as to whether it is weighty enough for the ICC to then follow the next step, and that is the step I'm interested in. That's the step of issuing an arrest warrant. What becomes important there, and I have in mind the element, or should I say, the war that is going on between Russia and Ukraine. And I'm saying this because Israel is not a signatory to the ICC. And so what steps will be followed in order for that arrest warrant to basically be executed?
Yeah, the execution, first of all, there must be, authorization for the arrest warrant to be issued. And that is a decision that will be taken by a chamber of the ICC once the evidence is provided by the prosecutor. And if there's a substantial case against a person or persons, then there may be an authorization for the issuing of warrant of arrest, like it just happened in the case of the president of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin.
Yeah.
So the execution of the warrant of arrest, of course, is a difficult issue because the person must find him or herself at a place or in a country which has jurisdiction in terms of its own laws to execute the warrant of arrest and then surrender that person to the ICC. You will remember the whole debate about the BRICS summit, which Putin initially wanted to attend in person. And the sort of debates in South Africa on South Africa's responsibility to arrest under our own law and surrender him to the ICC. And there was a clear indication that South Africa was under that obligation to do that. So a similar sort of story may unfold in the current matter, where the court decides that in the case of Gaza, there are certain persons who need to be arrested.
And so,
that is.
And so, similar to President Putin, Mr. Netanyahu will perhaps need to do his best not to find himself in a country that is a signatory to the Rome Statute. Am I hearing you correctly?
Indeed. That's sort of, once that arrest warrant has been issued, then the person who is the subject of that warrant of arrest must then decide whether he will take the chance to travel here and there because of the danger that he or she might be arrested. So the person might become totally isolated. Let me just make one point concerning the jurisdiction. You mentioned quite correctly that Israel is not a member of the court. But it is now established law, and that has been decided by the ICC, that court has jurisdiction over Gaza because of the fact that Palestine joined the Rome Statute. So the offences that were committed in Gaza, and if the Israelis could be linked to that, will give the court jurisdiction over those crimes and over the persons responsible for that.
Very interesting indeed. Professor, we then have to look at this from the prism of South Africa being a partner with Israel. Those ties, I mean, this is quite big. It's not the Minister of International Relations who has been for a while now advocating for this to happen. The President has now almost put a rubber stamp on what Minister Naledi Pandor has been saying, and that is to take Mr. Netanyahu to the ICC. What should we make of the relationship between South Africa and Israel? Is it basically done?
Well, I don't think it's entirely done, but it will have an impact on it. Because coming from a president of a country, it adds weight to the seriousness of the matter. And I'm quite sure that the prosecutor of the ICC will see it in that light. And certainly there will be consequences concerning the ordinary general relations between South Africa and Israel, especially politically. However, I doubt whether it will have much impact on the trade relations between the countries.
How can that be?
In most cases.
Isn't that a contradiction? How can that be? How can, if the relationship is severed politically, in terms of trade relations, how can South Africa still justify bringing into South Africa Israeli products?
Well, I'm not saying that it will entirely be stopped, because we have to understand that trade relations are not only state to state, it's also private entities in the different countries. So that will only stop if South Africa decides to put an end to that. And I think that will be a very, very serious decision to take in this matter. Let's take, for instance, Russia as an example. South Africa has indicated that it is under an obligation to arrest Putin, and he didn't attend because of that. And the trade relations are still ongoing between Russia and South Africa. So I have doubts whether it will really come to that point where all trade relations will come to an end. It might be that certain types of trade and products may, be affected, and that South Africa would decide not to import this or that anymore. But we will have to wait and see how this is going to pan out.
Finally, South Africa's possible role as a mediator here, is it safe to assume that given the steps that South Africa has now taken, they may not have much of an influence over Israel? However, there does seem to be this unofficial line to Hamas. Might that be the contribution in order to try and bring the two parties to the table?
Yeah, I think you're perfectly correct that South Africa cannot now be an honest broker anymore with Israel at least, and that the other avenue is perhaps a direct one to Hamas, to bring Hamas to a point to start releasing all the persons who are still taken hostage, and maybe to get some other concessions from Hamas towards a settlement in this regard. But that will be a hard fight, given Hamas's stance and given the ongoing hostilities that Israel is undertaking. But you're right. I think that's the only other avenue open for South Africa in this tragic story that is still unfolding.
Professor Hennie Strydom, let me thank you very much for your time and insights. He is attached to the University of Johannesburg.